Well, good evening, and thank you for joining us here at the Lost River Church of Christ. This is our Sunday evening worship. We're doing something a little bit different tonight, pre-recording this message for our Sunday night Bible study. But regardless of when I'm giving it or when you're watching it and listening to this, I hope the things that we'll have to say tonight will be beneficial and edifying to each person who's tuned in. Psalm 92 starts out by saying, "It is good to give thanks to the Lord and to sing praises to your name, O Most High." Although it really is extremely illogical, if you're anything like me, you find yourself constantly having to psych yourself up or to talk yourself into doing things that are actually good for you or benefit you in some way. Maybe that's finally going to the gym or going on walks or bike rides or runs, or maybe it's reading more and watching TV less or spending less time on social media. Maybe it's eating less garbage. Maybe it's getting out and talking to people that I don't know so well. And yes, maybe it could be, but it definitely is going to church and reading scripture and spending time in prayer and generally meditating on and thinking about God. But why is this the case? Where something that in a rational state of mind I know to be good and useful, but I still have trouble finding a desire to do it. And a lot of times, what we're even talking about is something that isn't in and of itself difficult to do, but it's still this psychological battle that part of me has to win to even get up and do it. There can be a lot of answers to that question, but this evening, what I want to do is stay here in the Psalms and then look at a group of Psalms, Psalm 92, 93, and 94, and see if we can draw out a few of the reasons of why we may tend to shirk off our good for us responsibilities, specifically as it relates to God and our discipleship of Christ. But I really think that this could be broadly applied in several different aspects of our life. So first, let's to open up our Bibles to Psalm 92. Psalm 92, and let's look at the first few verses there. It says that it is good to give thanks to the Lord and to sing praises to your name, O Most High, to declare your loving kindness in the morning and your faithfulness every night, on an instrument of 10 strings, on the lute and on the harp, with harmonious sound, for you, Lord, have made me glad through your work. I will triumph in the works of your hands. O Lord, how great are your works! Your thoughts are very deep. A senseless man does not know, nor does a fool understand this. When the wicked spring up like grass, and when all the workers of iniquity flourish, it is that they may be destroyed forever. A lot of times the problem isn't really with distinguishing between what's good for us or what's bad. It actually can be a bad analysis of the costs and the benefits associated with these things. One of the more common things that I think we tend to dissuade ourselves with is the apparent timing of the benefits that we receive when we want to pursue something that is good. It's a natural thing to place a premium on immediate benefits over future benefits. But then we're pushed into thinking that immediate benefits are truly more valuable. To use the illustration that I kind of referenced earlier, being more physically active, something that I can readily admit that I need to focus more on in my own or based on my own line of work and desk work, but I can fully comprehend that being active is better for me than remaining sedentary. But when it comes time to think about going on a jog, I start to have this internal debate. That's going to take some time. I'm going to have to use energy. It might hurt. I may start to have shortness of breath and wonder if this is all COVID related. And so maybe that 20-minute jog isn't really worth it after all. But I'm really over focusing on the short term benefits of time and energy and maybe even pain instead of the mid to long term benefits of generally being healthier, of looking better, of feeling better, and ironically, actually having more energy. Verse 7 here says that the wicked spring up like grass and that all the workers of iniquity flourish. And you might think to yourself, hey, that sounds pretty good. I mean, I like flourishing. I like quick results. But the verse doesn't stop there. It goes on to say that so they are destroyed forever. The way the pursuit of the quick and easy ends is disastrous, and it doesn't last long. Ultimately, it's shallow and it's trivial, and it actually ends in you're attaining that thing, but then having to find something else to take its place, something else to obtain. there really isn't any sustenance in this because God ultimately isn't in it, and He is the ultimate provider and sustainer of life. So contrast the wicked there with the righteous, starting in verse 12. It says, "The righteous shall flourish like a palm tree. He shall grow like a cedar in Lebanon. Those who are planted in the house of the Lord shall flourish in the courts of our God. They shall bear fruit in old age. They shall be fresh and flourishing, to declare that the Lord is upright. He is my rock, and there is no unrighteousness in him." The long-term pursuit of God and righteousness is exceedingly better. It's not like the grass that quickly grows, takes more than it gives, it flourishes, albeit for a moment, but then it hits some sort of a plateau or a max potential, and then it has nothing left to do but to wither and die and to be burned up. The righteous, those who are planted in the house of the Lord, shall flourish there and always be fresh and strong because they are rooted in the sustainer of life. Not only that, but they also produce. They bear fruit even in old age. Instead of this take, take, take mentality, they give because they are connected to the ultimate giver. Now, it's true that grass flourishes and reaches its fullest potential much more quickly in days or in weeks as compared to a palm tree or a cedar tree, which also flourishes but can take years or even decades to fully mature. But so what? I mean, when we compare the potential of crabgrass to a cedar of Lebanon, I mean, what are we actually comparing? Now, I want to come back to this point a little bit later, but verse 6 here says that a senseless man does not know, nor does a fool understand this. Do we even understand, or maybe a better way to say this is, do we even focus on and think about to comprehend this? Am I being senseless? Am I being foolish in placing an emphasis on what falsely appears to be short-term gains to something that may not seem to have immediate results, but really in the long run is everything that I could want? I think I remember Lawrence saying something similar once, but there have been times in my life where I'm sitting at home after a rough day at work or a tough week, and I'm tired. I really just want to be alone. I don't want to go to worship or to Bible study or to a brother or sister's house to share a meal and fellowship. But when I do go, I've never left thinking that I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I'd just stayed home. And we have to have this better understanding and appreciation in those before periods of how good it really is to be immersed in God. Second, let's look over in Psalm 94. So turn a couple chapters over to Psalm 94, starting in verse 8. There it says, "Take notice, you senseless ones among the people, you fools, when will you become wise? Does he who fashioned the ear not hear? Does he who formed the eye not see? Does he who disciplines nations not punish? Does he who teaches mankind lack knowledge? The Lord knows all human plans. He knows they are futile." Now, do we shy away from our life of discipleship, which again we fundamentally know to be good for us, because we are held back by this naive view about who exactly God is, about how high and awesome and mighty and holy He is, and then to take it a step further, we have this disproportionate view of how highly we might view ourselves. Maybe it's not that we don't view pursuing a godly life as good, it's that we see something else as better, or at least as better for us than how we see it. So often with passages like this one, where we read for the psalmist calling for judgment on the wicked, for God to show up and to right all kinds of wrongs that they catalog out. We view the evil and the sinful things that are listed, and we start to think about them abstractly, about things that are done outside of me. And especially because these psalms are typically written in the first person. These things are therefore being done by someone else. Would we take the time to stop and to take a good hard look at which camp we are really in? Speaking of the wicked, he says here in verse 4, "They utter speech and speak insolent things. All the workers of iniquity boast in themselves. They break in pieces your people, O Lord, and afflict your heritage. They slay the widow and the stranger and murder the fatherless. Yet they say, the Lord does not see, nor does the God of Jacob understand." So we read this and we say, well, I'm not slaying any widows, or I'm not murdering any orphans. I'm not actively beating down any of my fellow Christians. So clearly this is talking about someone else. Well, maybe, but what about the things at the top of that list? Can I smooth talk my way out of things? Can I rationalize things away to where they don't apply to me? Hint, hint for the rest of this list. Do I pour out arrogant words, as the ESV puts it? Do I have a tendency to be arrogant and prideful and boastful, thinking that I know the right of it? I know what's best for me. God doesn't really understand or perceive the situation as it applies to me, and I really know better than him what's best for myself. But really, we have got to learn to take a second, just a second, and to put it all in perspective. Most decisions that I've made where I have regretted them in life weren't ones where I paused and really thought it all the way through. And we have to be willing to spend enough time exalting God and having an infinitely higher view of Him than of ourselves. By contrast here, the blessed man, the one who really gets what is good, is the one who humbles himself. Look in verse 12. It says, "Blessed is the man whom you instruct, O Lord, and teach out of your law, that you may give him rest from the days of adversity, until the pit is dug for the wicked. For the Lord will not cast off his people, nor will he forsake his inheritance. But judgment will return to righteousness, and all the upright in heart will follow it." The idea of being disciplined and teachable or instructable here by necessity is humility. So that man is blessed. That man receives rest because a day is coming when wrongs will be righted. And knowing that the wicked, and include yourself here sometimes, although they think they have it all figured out and are in the process of lifting themselves ever higher and ever higher, what they're really doing is digging themselves a pit that's deeper and deeper. And rule one, when you find yourself in a hole, is to stop digging. More digging, more putting it on yourself isn't going to help. Understand your position in relation to God and humble yourself before Him to be lifted up. But with that, be humble enough to be prepared to be disciplined, to be instructed, to be taught, and to be trained to be like Christ, our Master. Something of a hybrid here to this matter of pride and too much focus on yourself is also too much of a focus on what other people are doing and a base instinct, I think, to be like them. There are innumerable psalms like this one where the psalmist, who is oftentimes speaking with the voice of Israel, that he calls out to God and he decries these evil things that these other people are doing. But then the same people of God are guilty of doing those things themselves. If we aren't careful, too much of a focus on a different lifestyle that right now we might fundamentally disagree with, that can become alluring. Verse 3 here says, "Lord, how long will the wicked triumph?" Or the NIV says, "How long will they be jubilant?" We may be tempted into thinking that we're losing out or missing out on something, and we want that triumph, or we want that apparent joy that my neighbor is experiencing, forgetting the state of how things really are. I remember last year, David Smay taught a class out in the auditorium on what is often referred to as the imprecatory psalms. That is the psalms where the writers are calling for God to bring curses and pretty terrible things to come down on their enemies. And he brought out a good point that we need to humble ourselves and ultimately leave things in God's hand and His timing, because He's ultimately working out all things for good. King David, not David Smay, but King David was one of those such authors of those types of psalms. And sometimes he calls for God to kill his enemies, to break their teeth in their mouth, to melt them down like slugs. But when he has the chance to do all of those things himself and more to someone like Saul when he's alone in a cave, and Saul is in a compromising position, his friends are there egging him on, saying things like, "This is it. This is what we wanted. This is what you've even been praying to God for." But he humbles himself and he leaves it in God's hands, saying that he isn't going to be the one to kill God's anointed. He refuses to sink so low as to become the thing that he abhors. Thirdly, am I holding back myself from following God, which I know is good for me, because of fear or anxieties. Verse 16 here says, "Who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity? Unless the Lord had been my help, my soul would soon have settled in silence. If I say my foot slips, your mercy, O Lord, will hold me up. In the multitude of my anxieties within me, your comforts delight my soul." Are we anxious about the cost of discipleship? That I might be giving up more than I can stand? And that is something to think about. I mean, Christ himself said to sit down and to count up the cost before we start to build a tower. Are we anxious about our ability to live up to a certain standard, or of committing to something that we think we're going to fail at? Or are we generally just anxious about life, about our jobs, about our health, about our families and our relationships? Are these anxieties in our life so powerful and so consuming that they weigh us down from our pursuit of God and something that is so good it can actually provide comfort in times of distress? The emotion of worry is perfectly natural, and I think therefore it could be considered a good and perfect gift from God that prods us in the right direction if it's used appropriately. But we can't allow that gift to be distorted and to run wild to the point that it defeats its own purpose. Fear and anxiety isn't just going to go away, but its basis can be removed. The psalmist here has real concerns. There are evildoers all around him, presumably attacking even himself. There are workers of iniquity doing him harm to the point that he was ready to just lay down and accept it. That is until he realizes that the Lord is with him and is his help. He even acknowledges here that, my foot slips. He isn't on some perfect trajectory. He cries out that he is failing. He is falling. He isn't meeting the standard. He is being crushed by forces outside of his control, and he's starting to faint. But that's just it. He acknowledges it and he brings it to the foreground instead of letting it linger in the darkness and pull him backwards into nothingness. And the Lord is right there, ready to pick him back up. And not only that, but to hold him up. It's not like we're just saying some prayer or we say to God, God, I've got 95% of this under control, but I just can't make up that last 5 or so percent. So can you come along and just give me a little push? No, he's saying here, hold me. In Luke chapter 12, verse 34, Jesus says, "Do not fear, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." He calls his disciples here the little flock, readily admitting that they really can't do anything themselves. Yet it is to them that the kingdom is given. These are unlearned, fallible, blue-collar guys. They're not master theologians or sinless Pharisees or powerful and power-hungry politicians or leaders of the people. But still, it is God's pleasure to give them the kingdom, to give them everything. The other key word in this particular verse in Luke 12 is your Father. Having a father doesn't mean that we won't feel afraid anymore, but it does mean that we have someone to cling to, and with him, and with only with him, our future is secure. Not too long ago, we were able to go to the beach, and this is one of the first times that as a family we'd all been at the beach together since Clay, who's our 2.5-year-old, was really able to play and enjoy it. Well, the first time that I take him out into the surf, it's pretty windy and the waves are they're big enough to where you kind of have to jump over them, and he's got his life jacket thing on that he's used several times before, and he knows that this thing is supposed to keep him safe and keep him afloat. But as we get out into about chest deep water for me, and I'm holding him, you can tell he's scared. But instead of flailing around, instead of panicking, instead of letting go of me and relying on this thing that he's used before to keep him safe, instead of trying to splash and kick his way back to shore, or instead of just giving up and letting the inevitable death waves just wash over him and end it all, he clings tighter to me. I can feel his arms around my neck holding on with everything he's got. As a wave starts to approach and he sees it, he grabs and holds even tighter. And at the same time, I'm doing the same thing. The wave is coming and I see it. And I turn my back to shield him, to hold him tight, and to gently jump up and roll over it. I do this because I'm his father, and his future is certain with me. I'm not going to let him go. And then before you know it, he's having the time of his life, and he's become essentially carefree and anxiety free. See, this is the joy and the peace of Christianity. Yes, there is something to be scared of, but that means that that's an occasion to only hold on tighter to God because he's our Father, and it's his good pleasure to give us everything that we could want that is good for us. Lastly, and to kind of bring all these ideas together, are we held back and rationalize our way of doing things that are good for us because we simply don't fully understand and comprehend who God is? Sandwiched between these two main psalms that we've looked at tonight is the short psalm, Psalm 93, and it reads, "The Lord reigns; he is clothed in majesty. The Lord is clothed; he has girded himself with strength. Surely the world is established so that it cannot be moved. Your throne is established from of old; you are from everlasting. The floods have lifted up, O Lord. The floods have lifted up their voice. The floods lift up their waves. The Lord on high is mightier than the noise of many waters, than the mighty waves of the sea. Your testimonies are very sure. Holiness adorns your house, O Lord, forever." God is creator. He is from forever and will be forever. He is majestic and he is stronger than the most impressive force that you can even think of. Everything he says is a certainty and can be relied on whatever comes our way. Are we distracting ourselves from following him because we paint him as being as weak as us? As if his arm is shortened and he can't reach us? As if he isn't enthroned on high and can see all things and has a perspective and a wisdom that even the oldest among us can't touch? Ultimately, are we spending too much of our time and energy focusing on ourselves, our own costs, our own pride and arrogance, our own anxieties and fears, that we lose sight of the everything? Both from a quantity and a quality standpoint, we have got to stop thinking of ourselves. And from a quantity and a quality standpoint, we have got to spend more time thinking about God. It is good for us. It will make us glad if we take these things into consideration. If our internal debates are trying to give us something good, something that we want, let us pray to God for the wisdom to know where and how to truly find the kingdom. More of him only makes us seek and depend on him more and more. So God help us strive towards that. Thank you very much.